This is a Federal News Network podcast.
Growth is the name of the game usually in business. However, trying to mask that growth so that your company can qualify for special government contracts is a tactic that some take despite the possible consequences. Fines, disbarment, or even jail time can come from not being forthcoming about your firm's current state or origin, especially as there's been an uptick in enforcement actions from the federal government. To discuss further about this, as well as other trends to keep an eye on for this summer, we welcome back Larry Allen from Allen Federal Business Partners. Larry, thank you so much for taking the time as always.
Eric, great to be here. Thanks very much.
Great. So, what is the uptick in? We've been seeing them come across the news waves from, whether it's a DOJ press release or a GSAIG enforcement matter, where they are starting to crack down on companies that aren't as small as they say they are, or aren't actually a veteran-owned business. What are you hearing in your circles?
Eric, I think the most recent GSAIG semi-annual report highlights a problem in small business certification that, while it's not a new problem, it certainly bears repeating because this is a focus area clearly of the contract enforcement community. And that is, if you're a small business, that's great. But if you're not a small business, even if you had been one 2 days ago, you need to own that fact as well. Simply put, you're living on borrowed time as a company that calls itself small but no longer qualifies as such. And one day that time's going to run out on you, and the consequences are serious, as we saw in the IG report. And you alluded to it in the beginning. One person is going to jail, actually, for a number of months and will almost certainly be suspended or debarred from doing government business for a period of time. Each of the companies that were involved in the IG report had to pay sizable fines. And, Eric, as I've said before, those fines don't just come out of the blue. It's not like, they come in and say, please pay us $1 million, and the company writes them a check the next day. I mean, you've got lost productivity, you've got legal bills that you're paying before you ever get to that point. So while I understand the value of having a small business moniker and doing business with the government, I also understand the danger of calling yourself something that you're actually not.
Yeah, so obviously the attraction to keep doing this is because then you qualify for those set-aside contracts. Is it also difficult for a lot of firms to make the transition from relying on those set-aside contracts to becoming a large business where you have to rely on your own merits rather than having this special, entity carved out for you?
Well, I think it can be, Eric. It certainly can be scary, and I think some of it depends on how much set-aside business a particular small business was doing relative to other business. Look, let's use the 8A program as just one example. You graduate from the 8A program typically in 7 years. If you're in year 4, it's time to start thinking about what it is you might be doing when you lose that status for a couple of reasons. One is the SBA could graduate you early if you're really successful. But the other is that, look, in 3 years, you're going to have to figure out how to stand on your own 2 feet as someone who no longer qualifies as an 8A. And again, that's just one example. If you're even just a regular old small business that's transitioning and you can see what the 5-year timeline is going to bring to you in terms of extra business, it's time to start thinking about competing on open market business, lessening your reliance on set-asides. I understand the lucrative nature of having small business set-aside business, but you have to think about tomorrow and not just what's coming in the next day or two.
Larry Allen with Allen Federal Business Partners is with us. Something that is not coming in the next day or two, but in a few years from now, the federal government is going to be trying to regulate exactly where semiconductors come from now. Semiconductors, kind of a term that is thrown around a lot. They are in just about everything. How difficult could this be on government contractors that are relying on semiconductors from sources in China that the government doesn't want to do business with anymore?
Eric, this potential rule could really be very significant for contractors. And that's why I'm writing about it this week and urging everyone to pay attention. And what we're talking about specifically is the issuance of an advance notice of proposed rulemaking by the FAR Council. The advance notice itself should be a heads up that this is going to be a potentially sticky situation. You don't have to issue an advance notice, but when you do, then it's typically an indication that you've got an issue that's going to be thorny and could have a lot of tentacles to it. And the semiconductor ANPR is no exception. Right there in the advance notice, the FAR Council is saying that it may require in a final rule that providers of semiconductors understand the supply chain provenance of each component that goes into the semiconductor that's provided to a government agency in fulfillment of a contract. That's a potentially substantial tracking burden, particularly if you're a small business. Think about your entire supply chain and being able to determine the provenance of each component along the way. Clearly, this is a national security and cybersecurity issue, and it's something that the government is definitely taking seriously. And since it is, so too should government contractors. But you have to be aware of what's going to happen in your business and what you could be responsible for. And if you've got some concerns with it, this ANPR is now the first time to set up and make sure that your views are heard.
Yeah, as semiconductors kind of there was a wave of talk about them just because of the geopolitical implications. I mean, is this going to be kind of the MO whenever a new piece of technology gets into the political hemisphere? Are contractors going to have to keep dealing with this every time they want to utilize that technology?
Well, that's a really good point, Eric. And I think, one of the things that I'm saying is that the semiconductor issue may actually go wider and deeper than the telecommunications prohibitions that are already in place. Those are popularly known as Section 889 A and B restrictions on telecommunications and certain types of IT. So we saw it here. We're seeing it again with semiconductors. We could definitely see it again in some other part of the technical supply chain or some sort of new technology. And you're right about the geopolitical implications. Look, the government bottom line is being serious, saying we're not going to allow products that have a tie to the People's Republic of China or their government to be part of a U.S. supplied solution in the government. That's just not going to happen. So, you need to figure out what the alternatives are. And if you look at semiconductors, the government has made a multi-billion-dollar bet on diversifying the U.S. domestic semiconductor industry. And so this is being done kind of hand in glove. We're not going to allow you to supply these types of semiconductors, but we are going to give you an alternative, and we're going to be providing seed money to develop that alternative in domestic manufacturing locations.
I had you look into the crystal ball for that last question, but I'm going to have you do it again for a little bit of a not as far down the road. What do things look like this summer as we now have the congressional schedule for the days that it will be in session, and what does that mean for the folks who do business with the government?
Well, Eric, I think one way to look at it for folks who do business with the government is if you want to talk to your member of Congress, you better go to the beach because they're going to be out more of this summer than not. As I'm writing, it's the endless congressional summer. Cue the Beach Boys, cue the surfer music. Congress is only really going to be in session for, I think 20 some odd days, very much in the low 20s between now and and Labor Day. And most of those days, I think 12 of them are going to be during this month of June. So if it doesn't happen in June, it's not probably going to be happening until September at the earliest. And even then, Congress is only going to be in for maybe 3 weeks in September, maybe more like 2.5, given all of the holidays and other things that they have on their calendar. So that's not a lot of time to finalize things like the defense authorization bill or the FY25 appropriations measures. We know that